I don't know about the two of you, but it's been a while since we've all
Hell
been in a
yeah.
virtual space together.
It
It
really has,
has.
and that's a shame.
Oh,
I
I
know,
know.
right? Well, we fixed it. We're fixing it
Yes.
here. So, we are gonna make sure that this is going out live to everybody. If you see this somewhere in the interwebs right now, let us know. Drop a little emoji hi in the chat. Tell us how our hair is looking. Whatever you feel like, down in the chat. I'm gonna go and pull up my LinkedIn and just make sure I can find it over here.
I'm
As we are
looking on LinkedIn. To me, it says the event will start soon. Nope, now it's started.
starting.
Wow.
Ooh, maybe there's like the 5 second delay in case we say something we shouldn't say. We can end it, right? All right.
Okay.
94. There it goes. Okay. As these two are furiously looking down on their computer, welcome. If this is your first time tuning in to one of these Keynotes Are Dead, my name's Spud, if we don't already know that, but we've been hosting these conversations live here on LinkedIn, on YouTube, talking with folks who hang out in the event, facilitation, speaking arena. And we've all recognized something, that the format of the sage on the stage is changing. People don't come to conferences, they don't come to events because they want to just be spoke at. They want connection, they want participation, they want to see that their voice matters, and they want some speaker who can kind of unlock that. And so we've been hosting these live jam sessions every so often. Today we are bringing Taylor into the mix. Taylor, you have like so many things in your repertoire, your arsenal, your Rolodex, that I feel like is relevant to this conversation when it comes to like facilitating, speaking, events, experience design, communities. You kind of do it all. So, could you just give us the 22-second version of like who you are, what you're doing, and why you're like, when we said, "Hey, do you want to come talk about keynotes are dead?" You said, "Woohoo! I'm in. Let's do this." Why are you here, Taylor?
Of course. Okay, honored to be here. I started my career working with bestselling author Seth Godin, who, as you can imagine, was on many stages and got to see him keynote and see other people that he was close with keynote. So he then took what he had built in his books and created these online workshops. And so I started my career really facilitating online. And I think if you can make magic happen in a Zoom room, it's then a lot easier to make it happen in a physical room. And so I built online cohorted based experiences and helped run the ones that already existed, and then moved over to Groove as head of community there, building a community from scratch. I was the first hire there. And so really rethinking, how do you build a container for connection, which was all about the idea of how do you bring an in-person co-working space virtual online for entrepreneurs, which Spud, you inspired so much of, because back when I was in college, Spud had started a co-working space called the New Leaf Initiative. It was my favorite space ever. I spent so much time in there. And so oftentimes when I was thinking about how to design the virtual version of New Leaf Initiative, that was what Groove became in my mind. And then I now joined Dreamers and Doers about a year ago, which is a online community for women all over the world, entrepreneurial women from all over, who come together to connect, build their businesses, expand what's possible for themselves in this curated community. And we also have our PR hype machine, so talking a lot about visibility. And as you can imagine, many of our members are keynote speakers, TEDx speakers, are on these stages, are hosting workshops. So this type of stuff is top of mind for not only my community members, but also for myself as someone who goes and facilitates at different communities and in-person, online, all that good stuff. So that is my short version of what's up.
Sounds
Good to
like
be
you're
in
the
the same
perfect
space.
person to talk to.
I cannot wait. And I love, like we were saying right before we hit record, I love thinking about how do we add some delight, some whimsy, some unexpected moments, making things feel extra homemade and curated. And I love that kind of stuff. So I'm hoping we get into that during this session too.
I
Love
mean,
it.
we get to decide, right? I guess
I know. That's part of the beauty.
Yeah, which honestly, so here's one of the things that I've loved doing these live jam sessions. If you've tuned in at all up to this point, when too often so many keynote speakers, right, they come in with their playbook of like, this is the thing that I have to hit, and there's no possibility to go off script. And I've loved that these like live jam sessions are like totally off script. It's like, where do we want to go? And so I'm really curious about the like that spectrum, right, that lives between let's just go with the flow, have a conversation, see where things happen, right? There's lots of that podcasty type of vibe. and then this like highly produced and on the stage, and there's these talking points, and I've got to follow slide A, B, and C. Where's the middle space, and what role and what responsibility do we all as facilitators and speakers have in like helping bridge that for the audiences that we speak and serve to? So that's where I want to navigate this conversation. Reagan, how are you holding up?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great. I love that. It echoes a little bit of what we talked about in our first live here, and there's a difference, if we've got a keynoter and we've got a facilitator, and we're trying to make a baby out of them as we're doing keynotes live. What gives? How do we do that thing? And it seems to me that if we, as humans, we like to default to the binaries because those are easier and those are clearer. But we want to do a little bit more work than that and live in the nuance. And so a keynoter normally thinks, I've got to memorize my talk, right? And a facilitator is then saying, well, I'm just going to go with the flow. And if we're not careful, we live on the two extremes, and never the twain shall meet, but never the two shall meet. But there's a difference between memorizing a talk and internalizing a talk. And I think that the best speakers that I see are the ones who, instead of memorizing it word for word, have internalized the intent, and they understand the direction that they're trying to go, so that if and when the energy of a room shifts or it becomes clear that the audience needs something, then we can pause and we can make room for that, and we can be flexible with it. So we're not abandoning memorization, and we're not just completely going with the flow. We're doing a new thing. And I wonder if that resonates with either of the two of you. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah, it makes me think about how social media, I think, has gotten us into this trap of wanting to have the perfect soundbite that is rehearsed and it's like sliced perfectly for social afterwards so that it could be in your reel of, your speaker reel, or it can be on Instagram or on LinkedIn or something like that. I think about this a lot. I've guested on many podcasts, and I always like to ask, and I try not to forget to ask the host, hey, how much is it, how important is it to you that we get these bite-sized clips where I drop a gem versus a great conversation that someone's listening to in full? Because depending on the podcast host intention of how they use those clips in their audio, it changes how I then present certain ideas and talk and that type of stuff. So I think that applies to the stage as well. Because if you were to strip away the need for this to be recorded, or for it to end up in a speaker reel, or for it to have that magical social media clip at the end of your keynote, then what magic could you create without that pressure that you need to have those sound bites? And I bet you'd still have amazing sound bites if you let go of that. But I do think that social media and those quick clips has really changed how people speak, and I think that's a shame.
Totally.
Yeah. Spud, how about you? What do you think?
I mean, I haven't thought about this memory in a while, but Taylor, as you're sharing that, so I met Seth, who was, I guess, one of your first employers. I was doing a project called Educate 2020. We were in an RV traveling across the country trying to document the future of education. This was back in like 2011, maybe somewhere around there, 2010. And we met with Seth. I remember in his like little apartment workspace. I don't even know what it was. I felt like I was like in his living room.
That's where I worked.
That was where you worked.
Also, I'm testing my audio for Amanda, who's in the chat. Let me know if it sounds better now without my headphones.
Awesome. But I remember Seth, we're filming him, and midstream he says, let me pause that. Can I re-say that sentence for you in a more sexy soundbite, right? Like, he was so aware as a professional keynote speaker of like getting the soundbite, and like, anyway, I was just like really taken aback by like his professionalism and like how he like communicated his ideas so clear in a way that he knew needed to be translated back to the audience. And so I'm fascinated. I've always like, there's almost a little bit of an imposter syndrome sometimes of like, as a facilitator, right? My sweet spot is like, and I think Reagan, you and I are probably like, we're not in these polar extremes, but like we probably lean a little bit more towards certain binaries. And like, I love the like fluid nature of a group and like how do I bring that to a main stage. And Reagan, I'm always jealous of your ability to like say the sexy soundbite and like it just comes off so well. So anyways, I feel like there is this like middle ground of like how do we navigate that when thinking about the future of keynote speaking and conferences and why people show up, and are they there for the sexy soundbite or can they just get that on their TikTok, right? Like where are they sourcing the information that they're consuming, and what role does a physical in-person event play in that? Which, Taylor, I mean, you're kind of an interesting spot because you do so much in the virtual space. We were talking about that right before we hit live, of like talking to folks and the difference between the virtual and in-person gatherings that you host.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I have spent my entire career in online community building. And so it's an interesting thing. I was talking to someone, I hosted an event on Monday with just over 75 women entrepreneurs in a space here in New York City. And I was saying, this is like the first time in the last year that I've actually gotten to host in-person events for my role. I've never had that. I've spun up things here and there, but I've never had it as officially part of what I do. And I do it here in the city where Dreamers and Doers all started 12 plus years ago. So it's not something I travel to a bunch of cities and do, but it is interesting to primarily be someone who runs online events and online workshops and thinks about the magic of how to show up in those spaces and then taking that in person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another thread we were pulling on at the beginning of this, Taylor, was there's an echo.
There was an echo. I think it was in Taylor's side. I just muted you, Taylor.
Okay, cool.
I have the ability to do that.
Another thread that we were pulling on the front end was, so when doing whether virtual or in person, one of the things that we're kind of noticing is, so people are in need of some instruction on how to do these things. And it's incumbent upon us as we're facilitating these kinds of events to create some guardrails or to create some prompts or to guide people into it. But it's also very uncomfortable for folks. And oftentimes from the facilitator end, I find that it's one of those things where it's like, we know what's good for people in this room, and that's that we point them toward one another and get them to do something that might feel uncomfortable now, but it's going to create a sense of connection. And at the end of it, they're going to say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you did it, but I was so mad when you asked me to do it. How do you all think about that? Because I think that one of the big roles that we're talking about playing here is being a little bit more prescriptive in the way that we point people toward one another. And it can be uncomfortable for folks who are just finding their way to this work.
Taylor, you have thoughts, or are you mic checking live? I gotcha. Where my mind went with that, Reagan, is like, if I look at a conference agenda, and I'd be curious if you're listening along right now, like drop in the chat for us. I would be curious what your number is. If you see an agenda, like I was just at a conference, a small gathering this weekend. Oh, a bit of an echo. Look at that. She was, for those that did not have an insight to the conversation before this, she was like unnodding her like headphones. I mean, she was like deep in the audio world. So don't worry, Taylor. We have full faith in you that you'll figure it out. Anyway, I was at this event and it had on the agenda 90-minute keynote. That was like the kickoff to the gathering, right? From 9 to 10:30. And I'm curious, for me, like if I see a keynote beyond 45 minutes, it's like, that's a block of time that I'm just going to check out on. I'm curious for others, like what's the number where you're willing to like sit with it. But if I see a 90-minute block, right, if I as a facilitator get a 90-minute keynote block, that's enough time for me, Reagan, to be able to like get people to turn to one another and introduce content. We shared something last week, or you shared something of like our role as keynote speakers is to introduce something true and something new. I love that. I had never heard of that. And so like it gives you space to introduce those content nuggets into the room and have time for people to interact, right? So if I take on a keynote, I just signed a contract for a conference later this summer, and it's like a 3-hour keynote, right? Yeah. Which I feel bad for the folks that are going to like look at this on the agenda. They're going to be like, what am I sitting through, right? But it's like, it's an interactive keynote experience. It had to fit into the keynote block. But anyway, I think about like how much time are we given as keynote speakers in the agenda, and what's the sweet spot where someone's not going to look at the agenda and eye roll of like, oh my gosh, look how long that is, versus also having the time that it takes to actually like get people to turn to each other and build those human connections. And sometimes it lives within the keynote block and sometimes it lives outside of that block. But yeah, I would just be curious both for folks in the audience of like, how long is too long for a keynote speaker? Yeah, Catherine says no longer than 45 minutes.
Do I still have an echo? How are we doing now? Testing?
That seems better.
Okay.
Seems better.
I've got my like my spaceship headphones on, I feel like.
I like it.
Yeah, I mean, Catherine said no longer than 45 minutes. Also, it's so fun to see a few friends here, Matthew and Amanda and Catherine, and I feel like there were a few more friends. Jordan's here, hey. So yeah, it's just, I think, as far as like what the right amount of time is, so when I started my role working with Seth, and also I want to say up front that like for some people, the way of keynoting, the way of like memorizing a speech, memorizing a talk, and getting up there and doing your thing for 45 minutes or whatever that amount of time is, like it is a business model that works currently. Like people are still looking for those keynote speakers. And if you can like rinse and repeat that type of a thing, and you're getting paid what you want to get paid for it, and you're getting in front of the audience you want to get paid for it, like it does work for some people. I guess what we're questioning is like, does it work for the audience? And so is that what the audience is looking for? And so I think that, when I was my first day in the working world, so I was supposed to start work on, it was back in 2019. I was supposed to start work on a Monday, and Seth let me know, hey, I'm so sorry, but like the day you're supposed to begin, I'm actually going to be at a conference. Any chance you want to come with me? And so I ended up going with him to this conference and got to see him speak live, which Seth is so engaging live on a stage. Like, it's really incredible. And as I was sitting there in the audience, I couldn't help but think, as I saw the lineup, like you said, Spud, of back-to-back big name speakers that are just going after each other, whatever. And I really wasn't seeing the networking or the connection-based conversations where there was a speaker, but it wasn't actually about them. I didn't see a lot of that on the agenda. And so I couldn't help, while I'm in this like giant room with thousands and thousands of people, of thinking like there could be something better here. And so it was funny because then fast forward, it's December 2019. And Seth knew I felt this way. I was like, there's got to be something where, like, what if the conference was all about the people and it wasn't about the speakers? And so I came up with this idea of, like, what if we hacked Zoom and we got, because Zoom at the time, this is what's so funny about, like, 2019, to go back in time, Zoom was not prepared to host virtual conferences with breakout rooms the way that it does now. And so it was webinar style. You could get, I don't know what the max amount of people was, but it was really about having a lot of people in the room, but not actually having it be connection based. So I think it was 50 breakouts that you could do, which if you even wanted 2 people to have a conversation, suddenly your max is 100 people that could be in that Zoom room. So I ended up coming up with this idea of what if we made a virtual conference that was all about the people. So Seth spoke for 5 minutes, and the rest of the 2 hours was all done in breakout rooms. And we had 2 facilitators in each Zoom room, because I needed 7 Zoom rooms in order to fit everyone, and like hacked my way in. Zoom's product team after was like, they reached out and were like, I don't know how you just did that. And that's December 2019, we made it. January 2020 is when it came out. And then obviously March 2020 made me suddenly a very popular girl of like, how did you do that? But it was really interesting because it was a new conference of its kind, where all of these people were suddenly being gifted really good questions based on the 5 minutes of what Seth shared, and then we're off to go and do something about it. Before, you wanted this arc of, I came here thinking about this and I left changed. I left with the next step of, this is what I'm going to do in my business, in my life, and they were really clear about what that was, and that's what the whole conference was for. And so I think what we're talking about is, how can we make Keynote something where people are going through that arc of change in that period of time, and it being less about the speaker. I also think it's interesting because we don't see on a lot of conference agendas the main event being something that's connection focused.
Right.
Yes. I just Googled what's the typical attention span of a conference audience member. Who knows where this stat is coming from, but it says 7 to 10 minutes. 7 to 10 minutes before people need some stimuli change. They need some connection. They need to see themselves in the content in some way. And so, a 90-minute keynote, just, you're going to lose people 15% of the way in.
And it's interesting. So one of the things that I've gotten to inherit from the Dreamers and Doers community, which is, it's cool now being a part of a team that has like all this rich history, is they've been running something called Deep Connections for a long time, which I think this is a good lesson in like, I picked a team that made a lot of sense for me, because they basically, what they do is they take what I was doing in breakout rooms and did not only in the like Akimbo and Alt MBA world, but then in my next role with Groove, of like the magic of a breakout room where you have a set of questions and people are digging into it and there's change that's going to be happening. I think this deep connections brings that in real life. So I wish I had, I don't think I have the piece of paper with me, but basically the way it's set up is almost like, yeah, like what you would think a virtual breakout room would be, which the piece of paper says everyone gets 4 minutes to share. You're not allowed to interrupt each other, but you get 4 minutes to share. These are the 3 questions you need to go through. And so after, setting the scene of the event, getting people into these small groups to have these meaningful conversations and then come on back. And I think that's what we're going to see more of in this model that we're talking about, is having these small group conversations that help us all move and grow together through the course of whatever that period of time is, let's say 45 minutes. Yeah, as Jordan said, it's, it's like a conference, or like Catherine said, like maybe it's a 10-minute keynote. What does a 10-minute keynote look like?
Yeah. And I would argue that a 10-minute keynote is worth more than a 90-minute keynote. It's a lot harder to convey
very hard
information that is critical for the audience to understand and walk away with in a memorable, powerful way in 10 minutes, right? That's hard. That's a gift.
And that's, I think, I just saw Jess's note about like with podcasts and online content, one-way learning does not add value in an in-person experience. And I think that's the key.
No.
If your session could have been just as valuable if it was recorded and watched back by someone who wasn't in the room, then it never should have been live.
Yeah, the model is so old. Information is now the commodity. And why would I come to your conference with all of your experts and authors and podcasters when I could literally train my AI agent to read all of their books and listen to all their podcasts and make a custom personal development plan for me individually? Why would I be one of 3,000 people in the room? But serendipity and connection and a sense of belonging, those are the things that are scarce now. Those are the things that we need to that we need to try and point people toward. And so I think that sometimes we need a starter, right? We need a thought starter, like a 10-minute keynote, or like someone who is really thoughtfully about to point people toward one another. But yeah, I think that we're missing what people are really hungry for right now. You could make all of the trite comments about how we're lonelier and more depressed and more medicated than ever, but kind of true. People are more scared of talking to one another. How do we create an environment where it feels safe? That's what I felt like the next logical comment sounded like.
One of the thoughts that came to mind, Catherine shared something in the chat about like, who are some speakers that you've seen that have a really good balance of engagement and delivering content and like within a 45-minute or less period of time. We've been talking here, and there's like a little shift in my head as I read that, of as a keynote speaker, how are you helping the audience take the content that you're teaching or sharing or communicating and let them like own it, right? Like they've got a question that they can dig into and they do it in groups of 3 or whatever. I think there's another version of engagement. And one of the speakers that came to mind was a conference that Reagan and I were running a year ago, I think, the IEX event. And there was a speaker, Richard Casper, and he was a vet, and he uses arts as a therapy tool to help people overcome trauma from kind of being in the military. And anyway, the way that he spun the keynote was, rather than getting the audience talking to each other, that never happened. There were plenty of other times that Reagan and I were making sure that happened. But during his 45-minute keynote block, he was telling his story and how it was the genesis to this organization he started. And then at the very end, he said, oh, and by the way, all of this that we do in our organization of like training musicians to tell the stories of veterans, we've been doing this live with you all for the last 2 days and you didn't even know it. And we had hidden professional Nashville songwriters in the rooms listening to the stories in the different breakout conversations that were happening in the conference. And then those musicians performed a song written with the words that audience had created over the last day or two, and they didn't even know it. And it was this like such a powerful shift for folks. Again, they never turned to one another in the audience. They weren't like talking, but it was another way where I think like masterfully they were able to like drop in this like creative engagement hook, where like there was connection happening throughout, but the participant didn't necessarily have to be the one turning to a partner and talking about a question, as much as I love that kind of stuff. So I think there's a couple different ways in which you can make that 45-minute keynote really engaging without having to use the audience?
I think that's really good, Spud, because people automatically think vulnerability dump with someone I don't know whenever they hear, let's make sure the audience connects. And I had a mentor one time who talked about how engagement in a speech can sometimes be crying. Engagement in a speech can sometimes be laughing, right? We're talking about trying to do a little bit more than that. Sure. But more than anything, the reason why we believe keynotes are dead is because the traditional view of a keynote is the dissemination of information. And we don't think that that equals transformation. There has to be, we should probably start collecting the list of the ways that we think we can engage an individual. And some of those are just with the individual and the idea or the person on the stage. And then some of those are with the collective in the room. But I think it takes different modalities.
Yeah, wow, that was such a good example with the songwriter. You know, yeah, I think that's a really creative example. I think that there are lighter things. For anyone that's listening, that's structuring an event where they want to bring in a speaker. I think what we were saying before of the amount of time you leave for connection versus the amount of time you're listening to someone speak is one easy flip to make. I mean, I don't know, have you two ever been to a Creative Mornings session in your local area?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so, I think one thing that they do really well is you don't sit there for an entire hour and listen to the speaker. I think it's like 20 minutes, maybe 18. It's something light. It's not a big monologue that takes forever. And so I do think that there's something to be said about the model of, let's say it's an 18-minute talk, but you've got 30 minutes beforehand and 40 minutes after for people to gather. That's an interesting gathering to me. I mean, I know that's not at a conference where we're talking about how, that model, but I do think that, flipping the script on how much time is spent on something is one quick, easy signal.
Totally. And think about how people just try and squeeze 10-minute breaks in conference agendas because they think that we need to get people back in here to listen to ideas instead of realizing that a 40-minute break might be exactly what the people in the room need so they can talk about the ideas with one another.
I've always wanted to put a little personal tracker. I have a toddler right now. And so the idea of I just always want to track his behavior and his movement around the house and where does he spend time. But I've always wanted to do that with conference attendees and see how many of them are actually slipping out into the hallway and where's the heat map of where they actually hang out. There was some German art experiment many years ago I read about where they took this big building and they filled it with fog so you couldn't see anything, which if you know me, I love fog machines. And so anyway, and you wore this vest that lit up, and before you walked in, you input these details into this app, and as you just got near to people, you would glow with the same colors or something, and it sort of created this interesting heat map where serendipity was the only thing that could have happened because there was no ability to see people and hey Reagan, come over here, come chat with me. It was just literally wander and serendipity. But what if you bring that dynamic into a conference, right? What happens when you start tracking your attendees? You see where they go, where's the hot spot? Can the keynote happen out in the hallway, not up on the main stage, right? Flipping the script in multiple different ways.
I love it.
Yeah, I love the idea of flipping the location and stuff too. I think two things. One, the phrase engineering serendipity just keeps coming up, and so I think that's a good phrase as we think about how to build a great conference. How are we engineering serendipity to be a part of that whole day? And then I also think my friends David Nabinski and Zach Hartoff just hosted a conference here in New York City for community builders a few months ago, or not even a few months ago, a month ago. It feels like a while ago, but a lot's happened in the last few weeks. And it was called the Community-Led Growth Conference, CLG. And one thing that they did really well was they made it very crystal clear on the website that this is for people who are interested in something different. This is not about the speakers, because everyone who's being invited to this curated conference could be a keynote speaker. And so it's not about that. We're not going to have anyone get on stage and keynote, but instead it's going to be all about the people. And so it was all structured around conversations and being really intentional. It, obviously the phrase unconference, et cetera, came up. So, but I think that what was cool about it was very clear from the moment you heard about it, this is different. They're putting a stake in the ground and saying, if this is what you like about a normal conference, then you're not going to like this thing, so don't come. And I think that that's what's interesting. I love that Erica's in the comments here, because I think that's what's interesting is when you find the people who are interested in these kinds of things, you can create a magnet for more people who are interested in something different too. And a lot of these big conferences aren't that magnet yet for something different. And so I think there's an opportunity there. CLG was Community-Led Growth Conference. So Catherine just asked that in the chat. But yeah, so I think that's something that I'm curious about is, have either of you seen a big name conference really take this on in a different way?
Spud, December. You're on mute, I think.
Spud, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. I'm there.
Yeah.
Yes. I was thinking December. When you mentioned architect serendipity. So Reagan and I were running an event in December, about 1,000+ people interested in education. And our quest was, how do we get people to find the serendipitous connections, right? There's a lot that we can do from a facilitation lens, but is there something we can do with technology? So we built our own, right? We vibe coded this. We built this AI tool where someone could say, and this was during a facilitated process, right? So there's conversations happening at a whole host of tables. So I could say, I'm trying to reimagine a training for my company, right? We've got this workshop coming up. And then it would automatically find the 5 tables in the room that people should go talk to, right? So go over to floor 1. This person, Leanne's talking about how to design X, Y, and Z. And it would tell you based on your interest, like these are the folks that you would want. And so this was like constantly being updated and live populated. I would say the argument here is that if you want to do a speakerless conference, right, an unconference, there is just as much work that goes into designing that well to do those serendipitous connections. And it requires like having tools like this that, you can make sure that the room is like making the connections amongst themselves. But to just like say, well, we're just going to get rid of the speakers, right, is actually doing a disservice to the audience, because now they're coming and it's just up to free will. Like, hopefully it happens. But when you actually have someone architecting that, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, well, that's such a great example. I think about this a lot inside of the community building work that I do, because, it's come up a lot with AI of, okay, let's say I had a directory of all of our members that are a part of Dreamers and Doers, and I put it into AI and I said, who do you think should be friends based on their bio? And if that's the only piece of information that I have is the 2 lines they give me about a bio, for example, and suddenly I say, oh, Spud, you should totally meet Reagan for this reason, etc. It's interesting because there's something funny happening right now where if someone were to say, wow, well, Taylor, that was an interesting introduction. How did you make that introduction? And I say, oh, well, I use ChatGPT. It suddenly makes it less valuable in that person's mind that AI was used to help make an introduction. We're seeing this a lot with all different, communities are talking about this, and all of these different platforms that are coming out trying to kind of hack this. But what I think is interesting is, and this is the thing that I can't get out of my head, and is, 2026, I think I will focus on more specifically for Dreamers and Doers, is what are the things that don't appear in a bio that we could be asking members or attendees of a conference of, I've been there and I've done that, something so specific, or this is something that I'm feeling right now, or whatever those different, those questions, that is pre-event, or landing in a community, landing in a container into a conference or something. That's work that needs to be done ahead of time to help make those conversations more interesting than just you two are community builders or you two are facilitators, so you should be friends. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of interesting stuff happen with conferences, is what you two are doing, of being really thoughtful about bringing people together about those wacky OMG moments of whoa, it's crazy that we're talking right now, which is what we're talking about, engineering serendipity, so that it feels magical still. You still have the OMG moment, but it's actually the chances of that happening, we increase behind the scenes.
Totally.
Yeah.
Beautifully put.
I would say, so there's both what's the work that you can do before a gathering to architect and engineer those serendipitous connections. And then the real magic, my favorite events, are where it happens on day one. There's something new that is blossoming, right? These new ideas, these new collaborations, possibilities of what our North Star might be that we're going to work towards. And then based on all of those new things that emerged, now you architect the serendipitous connections on top of those new things. That's the value of an in-person gathering. Like, that's why people show up, because it, like, even right, if we didn't do that there in the person or in person, you could host a virtual gathering where I don't need to fly across the country, right? And like, everybody fill out this form, tell me the things that you're working on, the ungoogleable parts of who you are, and then I'm going to make some connections. Like, that's still like the equivalent of like a good matchmaking meeting, right? But it's not the like, whoa, we generated something that didn't exist before that now exists, and we built the connections that weren't there before to enable that to take place. Like, I think that's what conferences are going to look like in the future.
It's an interesting thing. Have you two seen, and like, I guess I'm curious, we were talking before we got on of a little bit about like what types of speaking gigs would be most excited about, and we didn't really, we saved that for like, what's coming up and stuff. I think one thing that I'm curious about is like, let's say someone's hosting a retreat. Okay, I keep saying like, who's going to invite me to a retreat in Portugal to go and like host a fun workshop? But then I'm also like, I think if I went and hosted a fun workshop, there's also a role that like whoever's arranging this retreat, whoever's hosting it, could also bring me on to be like head of delight that is thinking about the little micro moments throughout the weekend where like, yes, I have my 1 hour, but then I'm also, what's the pre-welcome comms that people are getting in the weeks leading up? Like, there's something about that I think is really interesting. Have you seen that? Like, what's that title? What's that that job? What's that role? Have you been playing it? What's that look like?
Do you have thoughts? I have a thought, Reagan.
Go. I know this is you.
Okay, so the thing that came to mind for me was I was listening to a Trevor Noah podcast recently. Or not recently. It was sometime in the last year. I don't even know who he was talking to. It might have been Simon Sinek, something like that. But they were talking about the value of human connection and the epidemic of loneliness and blah, 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 blah. And Trevor was saying, he's like, I bring people together for an hour, hour and a half, right? So let's like, all right, take keynotes out of the picture, put comedian, right? I'm going to go like show up to Trevor Noah for a 90-minute stand-up, right? And that's interesting, like just thinking about that, like what do they do that is like uniquely different? But he was saying on that podcast, he's like, what am I doing? How am I serving my audience to actually build connection, right? These people primarily come, they sit in a seat, they listen to me, tell some jokes at them, and then they leave. And I remember we were listening to it, my wife and I in the car, and she's like, why do you not reach out to him? Like that's what you do. That's the job that is yet to be defined, that someone like Trevor Noah is like, who is that person that can come and help spark those connections in a crowd, both in the before, the after? How do you weave in the wonder, all of those pieces? So I think even people like that on stages like that are like kind of beginning to ask this question, like, who do I turn to create that type of magic in the audience? But it is interesting thinking of, like, I wouldn't want Trevor Noah to do a 10-minute set. Like, I'd want him to do a full 60-minute keynote, right? And like, just talk at me. So anyway, that's right. Let's bring Trevor Noah into the hot seat for the next one, Reagan.
Please.
That's our goal. Tag him in the comments. What about you, Reagan? I'm curious, like, what comes to mind for you around like what that role is and who do you see doing that? Yeah.
My thought, for some reason, Taylor, when you asked that question, I heard you talking about just like what potential conference role would you be interested in, or what would you want coming up? And for me, I want the most regular thing possible. I do a lot of work with credit unions, okay? And I speak at credit union conferences that have been the same since time immemorial. If there's any credit union people on here, I would love to just get to do all credit union conferences for 1 year, because they're doing the exact opposite of what we're talking about. And I would love to just get in there and to use Seth's words, to cause a ruckus, right? For me, that sounds like the most fun thing ever.
I think that's a really interesting thing. So I'm redoing my personal website right now and my branding, and like really thinking with what kinds of speaking opportunities do I want to say hell yes to? And one of the things that I keep coming back to is, do I want to be at events, be at conferences, be at retreats that are focused on connection? Or is that the wow that I bring to a space that is not having that right now? And yeah, so I think that's the interesting piece. And maybe there's a little bit of both. But it is something I'm sitting with of like, well, both would be fun in different ways.
Right.
Well, Let me add, I'll throw in one of our good friends, Chad Littlefield, into the room. He runs something called the Connectors Summit every December. He and I are working on doing the in-person version, but that was a gathering whose whole focus was on the power of connection, right? It's the first one that you're saying. And even in that audience, those people were craving an experience where someone was bringing in the connection kind of component to it. So I think, yes, there are the credit union conferences that have been the same way time in memoriam, but like I think even the like cutting edge type of conferences that we all know of, those people are also like really craving a slightly different model. So I think there's space for that. But I love getting into the conferences, right, that have been the same way for years and years. The challenge is, I don't know if you guys have come across this, many conference organizers, when they're like, Spud, can I hire you to come in and like revamp things? They're like, well, we need two other quotes to be able to like kind of compare against. I don't even know who to Google to figure, right? They literally have no idea, because there's not really a role, a profession, an industry, right? Like they can't go Google keynote speakers. I can send you to a speakers bureau with a bunch of my friends, but like what's required of like revamping a conference in its entirety to weave in connection to it, like I think we're like carving out a new career trajectory for folks right now. So yeah, I don't know what that looks like.
I want that to be a whole conversation on this hot seat thing because seriously, what we're talking about is we're talking about helping people see something they haven't seen before. And how do you get people to make the leap of trust to say, let us try it at your event? And how do we do that?
I mean, I keep going back to like delight, sprinkling that magic. Like that's what I imagine this role to be. But I do think it's an interesting thing how, do you find the overwhelmed host who's like, I am so deep in systems and making sure all the things are happening, whatever. I can't even think about the magic moments right now. But it's an interesting thing because is that a kind of person who's hosting that wants to think about that, but they're so overwhelmed and drowning in all the to-dos that they can't? So then they hire someone like us? Or is it someone who says, I really want this thing to exist, this event, but I'm not that person and I know that. And so I need this person to come on and help me. I think that those are the two different kinds of like event hosts that I've been thinking about recently.
I think there's different scales here. I think of it as gatherings that are 100 and under, gatherings that are 100 to 300, and then 300 plus. In my mind, those are like very different types of gatherings. The 300 plus, and usually when you're getting into the 1,000 plus, it is not uncommon for them to drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on an AV team that literally they have like one, maybe two calls with a month, 2 months out. They do their thing. They don't interact with anyone. They just make sure that everything's working smoothly, and then they're gone. And yet they don't put the same investment into the person who is like holding the experience for the thousands of people in the audience. And so I see the event coordinator is not the person to design these experiences for participants. They have a lot on their plate and they're often overwhelmed, and they're juggling the branding of it and how am I doing the sign up forms, and like they just have catering requests. Like they have a lot on their plate. In the same way that they put the investment into a production AV team, I think conferences need to start putting the investment into the facilitator, the facilitated keynote experience, call it what you want, the whimsy guru, right? Like that's, I don't think that'll command the dollars that it needs to, right? So I think it needs a more proper name, but yeah.
Yeah, the magical agenda maker.
Yeah, well, and I love that Catherine brought in Will into the chat because I think Unreasonable Hospitality is a book that I think about a lot. And I like it, when I read it, I wrote on some of those first pages in the book. I mean, that was one that I wrote a lot in, that I think a lot of the magic I bring into the world is being exceptionally thoughtful. That's my version of Unreasonable Hospitality. And I think that's the thing is like, before I host an event, like Monday's event, I put sticky notes in the bathroom to surprise and delight people when they look in the mirror. Like those are who's doing that work that and after, people look in the mirror, Instagram stories. I always see the Instagram story where someone's like, look at Taylor and this is her sticky note for the day. Like there are those types of little low cost things that I think just add so much magic in making someone feel seen in a moment, especially when you're like, I think the bathroom mirror is just such a good one of like, maybe you're hiding in the bathroom, you're like, oh my God, I'm so overwhelmed with all the conversation, whatever. And then you see this little sticky note, and the sticky notes I have little eyeballs on them. Here it is. And I just think like that's the cutest little whimsy to have in the bathroom for you. And so who's doing this at a big conference? No one as of right now is not what that's not what I'm seeing.
I literally was just talking to a conference organizer, and right, they have all these panel speakers and folks, and I was like, can I just introduce a rocking chair instead of a podium?
You love a rocking chair, and I love it.
I mean, that's the last event that we were all together, right?
I've seen you deliver a keynote from a rocking chair, Taylor.
And they were like, oh, the conference venue, they don't have rocking chairs. And so I was Googling like foldable like rocking chairs. Can I like brand some rocking chairs that I can bring 30 rocking chairs to the conference and just like write these subtle little cues. A Post-it note is so much cheaper than what I'm working on. But yeah, I feel like that does a big mindset shift for the audience of like, oh, this is different. Like we're gathering in a circle around a rocking chair, or there's a Post-it note in the bathroom, right? Like, yeah, we need to create a database of all those like little hacks that.
So one of my friends, Exa, is doing something somewhat similar. She's calling it the Gathering Guide, I believe, on Substack. And so that's one to check out, where she's interviewing a bunch of people who host gatherings and are kind of pulling in some of those. So that's used to work at Creative Mornings.
Let's get her into the hot seat.
I know. Extra Kohler, I think is how you say your last name. But yeah, so you sparked one more thing that I wanted to say before we left, and now I'm like, oh, you know what? This is last thing I'll say, and then I know we need to wrap this sucker up.
Yeah.
I think about this a lot with Airbnbs. Do you both go to Airbnbs a lot? I know, Spud, I mentioned this to you a little bit. Okay, I love Airbnbs. My family was like on the VRBO train way earlier than it was cool. Like people were like, you're staying at a house? And we were like, yeah, there's 4 kids in the family. We're staying at a house. Like calm down. We don't go to hotels. And so I have been on the vacation rental, piece of things for a long time. And I always find that there is an opportunity to dial up the experience, again, before you even arrive, but also when you do arrive, to make it just that much more interesting and memorable and thoughtful. And so I said to Spud, if someone sent me an email tomorrow and they were like, if I just posted my Airbnb and I want someone to add a little extra whimsy and thoughtfulness to the experience to make it truly memorable from the moment someone lands on my Airbnb page, I'm like, that's interesting. That is like an interesting role. Who's doing that? But I think that what I described to Spud in that way is the same type of skill set that needs to be used for this too. Like there's something here about, the sprinkling of the magic, but having to, I hear my echo now. But yeah, having to basically articulate the value of that to someone. I'm landing the plane. That's my last.
That's right. I think that points us to where we need to go next, because the energy behind this is here, and we keep getting validated. But the people who joined us today, thank you so much for being with us. The folks who continue to want to be in the hot seat, Taylor, thank you for doing this with us. I think logically this points to, though, so the need's real. I don't think we have to convince people of that. How do we articulate that it's safe to start experimenting in this way? And how do we figure out a way to scale people toward it?
Some people have asked us, because we don't know what the model is of this Keynotes Are Dead thing. We just know there's a need. Let's start chatting about it, and some format will emerge afterwards. There's been talk of this idea of creating like an anti-speakers bureau, which is basically the undefined role that we're all trying to name, right? Like, what would it look like if we actually could name 100 people, 1,000 people around the country, around the world that are like doing this type of work, and like we legitimize the model that more event organizers need to take on? Like, I don't know, maybe that's part of what we're called to do. Who knows? So we'll figure it out as we stumble through this. So.
Love it.
But Taylor, to your point, I did just I did not buy.
Could you imagine?
Reserved the world's largest VRBO literally last week. So it's a giant castle. So
I have such FOMO that I won't be there. But yeah, that sounds so fun, and I can't wait to see pictures and videos from it. Before we leave, I think Jess's question was so good in the chat that I at least need to say it out loud and see if there's anything. How do you scale whimsy?
if you're live at an event, my immediate thought is give people. Spud's was good at this in the events that we used to do. Give people random stuff and say, go do something with this. Here's the Post-its for you. You get confetti. You get bubbles. I want to see you figuring out a way to use it over the course of the event.
Yeah, I didn't have like a knee-jerk reaction to the question, but I think whimsy lives at the small scale. Like, I think it lives between small, intimate moments. I almost think of the difference between like, and I don't know if this is an appropriate scale, but like the difference between whimsy and awe. Like, awe is something where it's like, I'm on a mountain cliff and I'm overlooking something like big and expansive, this big scale. Whimsy feels like this small, like the Post-it note in the bathroom that's just for me and the Post-it note. It's this personal experience. And so like, I think the question maybe is like, how do you create a magnitude of those small micro scale whimsies, right? And like, right, that's like, that Post-it is going to be enjoyed by 500 people that cycle through that bathroom, right? So it's like these small, intimate, whimsy things that can just be repeated. So maybe it's like, how do you create repeatable whimsy moments? I don't know. But I think like scale it. Like I do something with audiences where you guys have probably done the finger spin. I know Reagan has. I love this finger spin thing, right? Like put your finger above your head, spin it, move your finger down. What's different about it? And your finger changes from clockwise to counterclockwise because of this perspective shift. I just like totally butchered the ooh moment, but that's like a moment of awe, right? Like when people do that in the crowd, they're like, whoa, my mind is blown. I don't equate that to whimsy, but it is at scale. I can do it with 1,000 people in the audience. And it like introduces this context hook of like, okay, today is all about shifting our perspective and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, the difference between whimsy and awe is where my mind goes. Good question. Who asked that?
Catherine, or no, Jess, you're right. Jess asked it. So good.
Amazing engagement in the chat today. Thank you for everyone who joined us.
Yeah,
thanks all. Yeah, we should probably wrap this conversation up. We told ourselves maybe 30 minutes, maybe 45. We're at an hour, so oh well. It happens when you have a good chat. So.
Yeah. If you're into this, if you know someone who we should bring into the hot seat, if you know anyone who wants to cause a ruckus, again, to use Seth's language, let us know because we're having a blast doing it.
Yeah. KeynotesAreDead.com. You can find what we're up to. It'll keep evolving as we go. Reach out to Reagan, myself. We'd love to throw someone in the hot seat next. We have no idea who it's going to be or when it'll be, but we promise it'll happen at some point.
I love the beacon of light that you're creating for people like us. So thanks for doing this work. This was
Taylor,
so fun.
Thank you.
This was fun. All right.
Bye, crew.